Well, good afternoon. Pastor always says good morning, but we adjust here, so. I guess I should tell you a little bit about who I am. You may have seen me around church. We've been here for 3 years, kind of in the background, so to speak. Known these folks for almost 50 years, but and Gene was delivering gas to our church for 30 years, so, or something like that. In 1970, I'll tell you that I am married. I think you met my wife earlier. She's the brains of the outfit. And we have 4 daughters and 9 grandchildren. In 1972, I started teaching children's classes, after school, release time type Bible classes at Pioneer Church. It was across the street from Pioneer School, which was in the Pioneer Fire District. So it was just Pioneer. And I think I'm going to break my talk into 5 phone calls that I received over the course of 35 years or 40 years. And that first phone call was, "You've been teaching children's classes. Would you preach for us on Labor Day weekend, that Sunday of 1973? And I said yes. They asked me if I'd preach for 2 weeks, and 43 years later, I retired. So in June of 2016, I retired. In 2017, we bought property in Shingle Springs and built houses. And I say houses because my daughter and her husband, who was a contractor, was the leader of our building project, and we built 2 houses on a 5-acre parcel over in Shingle Springs. So it was good. That was my first phone call. Would you preach? As a result of that, God blessed us, and I would have to say, with moderate church growth. It's a very difficult question, and everybody asks preachers this. So how's your church doing? Well, how's your church doing? I don't know how it's doing. So I'll just give you the summary. We started out with about a dozen families, maybe 25 in attendance. When I retired, we probably had 150 families, 150, 175 in attendance on Sunday morning. Annual budget went from about $3,000 to $300,000 annually. And over the course of that time, we baptized about 350 people. So I call that moderate church growth. God was blessing us all the way through, and it just seemed good. I'd like to tell you just some unique things about a country church. And I'll do it by telling you about some people. I was fortunate that my home church, our home church, was in Placerville, felt led to start this church out in Somerset Mount Auckham area. And so one of the pieces of that puzzle was, that plan was that they would send the chairman of their church board, who lived about halfway there, send him out, and he would be part of the founding group. Well, that man happened to be my junior high Sunday school teacher. And he was a tremendous personal evangelist. And so most everything I know about evangelism, I learned from Gordon. I do it just like he'd do it. I'd ask you about Romans 10:9, I'd quote it to you, and do you want to be saved? Now, I'm not very effective at it, but that's how he did it, so that's how I did it. Somewhere in that junior high age, I got saved. It's interesting, it wasn't from Gordon's witness, though. It was at a youth rally in Galt, California. But Gordon went from being my Sunday school teacher as a junior hire to the place where we were partners in ministry out in Somerset. I was his pastor. I don't know how a 23-year-old pastor is a 50-something guy that knows way more about the Lord and the faith than he does. But at any rate, I was his pastor, and I pastored him through the death of his first wife. I pastored him through widowhood, through the marriage of a second wife, the death of a child, and his death. And so I was blessed to be both a pastor and partner with my friend Gordon. Over the years, we disagreed on a few things. Eventually, God showed me that he was right, and so I changed. I was reminded, Pastor Brian this Sunday talked about having faith and not feeling like because you had faith you didn't have to have a plan. I agree with him 100%. You need to have a plan when you're going to have faith. Our church started out, the first budget we had, they were going to pay the pastor $100 a month. One of the unique aspects of country churches is poverty. I have heard it said that, Lord, if you keep him humble, we'll keep him poor. It was a big mistake for me not to go to work, but I was told by my advisors, you need to just trust the Lord and do the ministry. And so I did, and we got more and more poor and more and more poor. And eventually, I said, stop. We got to change something here. And you don't have any money, so I'll just go to work. I can preach on Sundays and Bible study on, we did all three. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night prayer meeting. We were doing all that, and I could do that and find some kind of work. In fact, from time to time, people in the community would hire me. Had a friend that hired me to pull green chain. It's a sawmill experience that nobody wants to have. That's why you got the big, strong pastor. We'll put him to work pulling green chain. Or had a friend who would set pumps in wells. And anytime he got one that was more than 200 feet deep, he called Pastor Rob. Now that was good for me because it supplemented our income, and it was again a unique thing to being a country pastor. People gave us cars. As I was reflecting on this talk, I realized how many years it was that I didn't have to buy a car. People would see what I was driving and say, you need another car. And they'd give us one. Kind of humorous story about that. We were on our way we got a raise. And so the next Sunday, we're on our way to church. Somehow I drove off the road on my property, on my driveway, and got stuck. So my neighbor, who had this brand new Lincoln Continental, said, well, Rob, just take our car to church. You get the picture? Pastor gets a raise, shows up in a brand new Lincoln. The good thing about that story was when I got home, the fire department had already come and pulled my car out of the mud, and I was restored to driving again. People would give us beef, had an extra cow in the pasture, just give it to us. Sometimes they'd pay for the slaughter fees. So it was a total gift. And of course, over the years, lots of people gave us cash. more eggs than we can eat, and zucchini in abundance. The Lord also took care of the church as well as taking care of the pastor and his family. The church actually was started in the 60s. And this landowner he had about 100 acres. They raised cattle on and grew walnuts on. And a group of Christians got together and they wanted to start a church with the American Sunday School Union. And so he fenced off about half, 3/4 of an acre and just gave it to them. Now, no legal documentation was done. It was just change the fence line. And so they built a little 1,000 square foot building, almost. That is, they almost finished it. And when we got there was no floor covering. You could see through the knots on the subfloor to the ground underneath, and you could see the mice run up through the subfloor. And at any rate, it was rustic. That was the first time, but for 2 other times, I went to this gentleman and just asked him, you got to be slick to do this. Ask him if I could buy some property from him. The church could buy some property from him. And you know what he did every time? He gave it to us. In fact, one time, the last time, I went and I said, we're growing and we need more room, and can we buy this section back here? He's got 100 acres and we're buying a half acre at a time or something like that. He said, you don't want that. That's all drainage. You want this good building area over here. And so he gave it to us. And actually, the last time we finished the deal, his children knew he had passed away, and his children knew how much he loved the church. He loved the Lord. And so they honored us by doing the same thing their father would have done and given us the property that we needed. I thought that was pretty amazing. And another gentleman, he was an insurance salesman. I don't know if you've ever had an insurance salesman approach you. But he was part of the congregation. He'd gotten saved under our ministry, and he urged the congregation, after we had incorporated and become independent, he urged them to begin to invest in our pension. And one of the things he did is he said, for the next 20 years, I'm going to pay for your life insurance. And so for 20 years, he paid on a $200,000 life insurance policy that got us through till last year. We're kind of thinking we don't need life insurance. What we have is good enough. The 200 will let it lapse and so on. But there was just amazing generosity in people at various times. And there were some very special people. By the way, the second, third, fourth phone calls won't be as long as the first phone call. So the one guy that was really special to me was, his name was Victor. He showed up in the mid-70s, and he was, I know because he was 74 years old and he was born in 1900. 74, he had just gotten saved. He showed up with his giant Schofield Bible. He had 2 sisters that had been praying for him, and he finally got saved, and they gave him the Bible. He was a unique character. Every Sunday, now you got to understand, church was a little more informal in this country setting. So every Sunday, he would bring a joke. Say, can I tell my joke? And I will tell you that Victor never repeated a joke, and it was never off color. He was a delightful guy, And just fun to have in church. Another couple had 4 daughters. They're basically our children's ages. And she became my secretary. Now, I was the HR guy, and I had this philosophy of personnel. If I want them, I just go ask them, would you work for me? So I went to Pat and said, Pat, would you quit your job and come work for me? And you know what? She said yes. About 25 years later, she retired, and she on occasion would refer to herself as wife number 2. She and my wife are still good friends to this day. Her husband, for a period of time, was part of our elder board. He is now with the Lord. The other one was, we came time that we would like to have a second pastor. And I had a friend that I thought should be our pastor. And the reason I thought that is because he was the opposite of me. I'm the kind of, you guys know Dylan? Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's a guy like me. He fake smiles for you every Sunday. I can't tell you how many women approached my wife and said, why doesn't Pastor Rob like me? He didn't smile at me in the hallway. Pastor Jim was just the opposite. He never met a stranger. He and I would go to an event. I knew we had to schedule an extra 20 minutes after the event was over because he was going to be talking to people. And probably the main speaker at the event. That's just who he was. That's who he is today. We co-pastored for 20 years together. And when I retired, he pastored on and still is today. I guess as I started making this list of people, I'm glad that none of you attended Pioneer Bible Church, because then you'd be offended that I left somebody's name off. There were lots of names that I could have added, but here's a special guy to me. He was a retired bank manager. When he left Bank of America and retired, he was supervising 32 banks in Southern California. He was a smart guy. He did his budget with a pencil. It's just the way I did it. He was a numbers guy, just like me. He thought like me. The amazing thing is that when Frank talked to the deacon board, he could say the exact same words I said. They listened to him. He was a little bald-headed Italian guy, and boy, could he make biscotti. I love to have coffee with Frank at his house, in his kitchen. You know, one thing that was unique about Pioneer Bible Church is that we were the only church in a 10-mile radius. You go south, there was River Pines Bible Church over there. You go to the east, you had Grizzly Flats Community Church up there, and you go north, you had Grace Community was in Pleasant Valley. And so there was this, in essence, for years and years, I was the only pastor in the community. I was pastor to the community. And that made things a little different than traditional. One of the things that happened, phone call number 2, not in order, but was that I get this phone call from the guy that ran the food bank. His name was Mike Sproul, and he ran El Dorado County Food Bank. And they had been distributing food out in South County for some time, and I had this philosophy that I should do what the people I was asking the men of the church to do. And so we had a building project going on, and I'm asking these guys. We built about 8,000 feet over the course of 4 or 5 building projects, debt-free, no mortgages ever. But I'd ask these guys to come volunteer on their days off. Lord put it on my heart and said, Rob, what are you doing on your day off? Well, I was working in a ditch building a church. And it always happened to be Friday. Well, that was the day the food bank would distribute food at our church in the back parking lot. And so I'd hang around with these guys, and on the cold days, I thought, this is crazy. And I would make coffee and invite them in for coffee. And as a result, Mike heard about this, and he called me and asked me if I'd be in charge. And so I said yes. And then I got called to meet with him and the previous leaders. And they presented, the first time I met these ladies, they presented me with 2 pages of complaints. I had not done anything, period. But I had these 2 pages of complaints to deal with. I looked at them and I said, well, I think we can fix all this. No problem. Well, it didn't quite work out that way, but for the next several years, we worked together. But as a result of that, this guy, I met lots of people in the community. It's like I told people I had 2 congregations, one on Sunday morning, one on Friday morning. One of the guys that I met was decided he wanted to get married. So I met with him and his fiancée and talked to him, and I agreed to do their wedding. Now, it was an unusual wedding, which wasn't unusual in Somerset, but it was in a corral. We're talking low end here, folks. And so I'm in the corral, and they put a little piece of carpet up front for the wedding party to stand on, and then they put a runner of carpet up the middle of the corral. Dirt everywhere, junk cars and junk trailers, and at any rate, so we're getting ready, and I go forward, and I'm up there with the groom, and here comes a dog walking down the aisle with a ball in its mouth. This was my first outing after I had my shoulder repaired, and I was out of a sling. And so the dog comes up to me and drops the ball in front of me. I reach down with my right arm, which is my throwing arm. I think, I can't do this. So I reached down with my left hand, picked the ball up, and threw it. And you know what the miracle was? Dog never came back. We did the wedding, and another wedding that was really unusual. This one wasn't in the notes, so you get it for free. This couple had been living together for 42 years. They were approaching retirement age, and they weren't married, and nobody knew it. Their kids didn't know it. Nobody in the community, their friends didn't know it. But Social Security knew it. And so they came and said, we have this secret that we've been keeping all these years. Would you help us? And so I told them about confidential marriage licenses, and they could go get one, and we could work this out. In my office, we could work it out. My secretary was one of the witnesses, and I don't even remember maybe the custodian was the other one. At any rate, we got this wedding done. Very unusual, but back to the wedding with the dog in the corral. About 2 years later, I heard that the groom had gotten drunk and died in a swimming accident. And so his wife came to me and said, Rob, would you help us with a memorial service? I said, sure. And so I went to this memorial service, and I just do what I do. I'm dressed up in my suit. Over the course of the years, I got called to do funerals for motorcycle gangs. Would lose somebody in their family. And I'd show up in my three-piece suit, and they're all decked out in their leathers and their stuff, but that's just who I was, And so we're standing there for this memorial service in what I would call a bar. It was a service club, had a little auditorium, but basically the bar was at the back of the room, and we were all bellied up to the bar. Now, I'm a teetotaler. I got 71 years of sobriety in. I'm going to stick with that. So I'm sitting there drinking Diet Coke, or probably it was Diet Pepsi, but, and I'm wondering, when is this thing going to start? I mean, they're eating, they're drinking, and I'm not sure what they're waiting for. Usually in these kind of things, I'm in charge. And so I tell them what we're waiting for and who would start to this or that. Well, I'm waiting for the widow. And so she finally comes up to me. Now, you got to get this picture. We're in a crowd of 50 people. Half of them are drinking. They're all talking, loud noise, carrying on. She says to me, Rob, let's start. Well, can I have your attention? I step up, go do my thing. It's an unusual situation. Phone call number 2, the second one I'll talk about, I got from the superintendent of schools of the Pioneer Union School District. He said, Rob, we got a problem. And I really want you to run for school board. We have a gay activist who just filed his papers to run for school board. We got 2 days. Would you run for school board? Now that's a problem. Namely because my dad hated politicians. And I grew up with that in my mind. And I was not at all sure that my elder board, which I was committed to get their blessing, would approve that. But you know what? I called all of them, and every one of them gave me their blessing. I ran for school board, won, got 84% of the vote, and served for a term, took a term off, and then came back and served another term. But the reason I had connection with the school superintendent is because I was a volunteer at his school. I volunteered in my children's classrooms. My kindergarten story is wonderful. I'm sitting on the floor with this kindergarten boy, and teacher says, could you help him? And he's putting ABCs together, A, block B, C. Well, he's stuck at K. He's on K, and he can't find the next letter. I said, what are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for the L and O. The other thing I did for the school was I refereed everything. I refereed football, basketball, wrestling. I didn't referee volleyball. Never did learn anything about that. Also refereed soccer for Rec and Parks League. Had refereed softball and baseball for years and years, but that was my thing. I was a fundamentalist by nature. You give me the law and I'll enforce it. And that's what I did as far as all these sports. And so the superintendent called me. Another phone call I got was from a friend, casual friend who attended church, and he said, "We've had a tragedy in our community. Would you go visit this father and mother?" They had just lost their 2-year-old and 4-year-old daughters. I didn't know them. I was terrified to go, but I went. I talked to them. I did the funeral. There was one guy, I couldn't figure it out, didn't cry in that funeral. Everybody else in the congregation was in tears. I went to the reception afterwards, and in the kitchen, the dad was drinking Jack Daniels straight, out of the bottle. You know, he was heartbroken and mad. Today, he's a precious friend, and serving in pregnancy counseling service on their board, has for years. God changed his heart, saved his soul. I remember, how long do I have, by the way? I guess it doesn't matter. What does that mean? Doesn't matter. Doesn't mean anything. Too many stories to tell. I was part of the volunteer fire department. See, I'm just looking for ways to get into the community and meet some guys, you know, and so that's one of the things I did. And they came to me and said, "Rob, would you teach CPR and first aid?" I said, "I don't know CPR and first aid." "And you got all these EMTs in the volunteer group." They said, "Yeah, but they don't know how to talk. You know how to talk. We'll send you to classes and you can learn about CPR and first aid." And so I became the CPR and first aid trainer for Pioneer Volunteer Fire Department because I could talk. In fact, I was such a good fireman, I won the King Toes Award one year. That's what you get for the biggest screw up of the year. One of the unfortunate things about the fire department, though, experience is that there was trauma. Most of the fire calls that fire department goes out on are medical aids and car accidents, heart attacks, that kind of thing. Just about the last call I ever went on, I got the call, I was there first. I walk in this living room, and this grandfather, who I knew, hands me this baby, infant, had SIDS, had died in the crib. And so I began to do CPR on this little baby for 45 minutes, all the way to Marshall Hospital in the ambulance. I was doing compressions on this little baby. Of course, you start CPR, you start out with dead people, you usually end up with dead people. And it traumatized me. And that night, a friend of mine who was a paramedic called me and said, "Rob, do you need to talk?" You know what I said? "I'm fine." But you know what? I wasn't fine. A year later, the chief called me and said, "Rob, you haven't been to a training in a year." You know what happened that day is my heart broke and I was done. Two more phone calls. I got a call from the chaplain at the El Dorado County Jail. He said, "Rob, would you come and, I'm really wearing down, would you come and teach some classes at the jail?" Well, you know, I had never, at that time, I'd never been in jail. Since then, I had a couple brothers that have been in jail, and so I go to jail I've been there many times. But at that time, I had no experience in jail whatsoever. And he said, "Well, here's what you do, Rob. You just bring a Bible lesson, and here are the rules. They can't smoke in church. They can't talk while you're talking. And they got to wear their shirts because we don't look at their tattoos. Well, you know me, I'm a law keeper. First thing I say to this group is, let me tell you what the rules are in church. And everybody would go to church because it was outside. It was in the exercise yard, outside with concrete walls all the way around and a chain link fence across the top. That kind of outside. And so, you know what happened? I start preaching away. And the biggest, baddest looking guy in the crowd starts talking to his neighbor. You know, I can't tolerate that. So I called him out and said, you know the rules, please pay attention. And so I finished the service, and I decided I should make nice with this guy. I'd called him out, embarrassed him in front of all his comrades. So I walked up to him and I said, I just started talking to him. I asked him if he knew Christ. He said, oh yeah. And he pulls his shirt up like this, Jesus saves, big bold letters across his chest. I got that tattoo in San Quentin, he said. And, you know, it's, over the years going to jail, I started out, I was terrorized. I asked the biggest, boldest Christian I could find to go with me. And so we went together because I was afraid. You know, the course of 18 years that I was doing jail ministry, God changed my heart. And I became totally at peace in the jail environment. You know, you go in, hopefully you've never done this, but you go into the elevator, door closes behind you, you get down, you go out the other side, with permission, of course, and you get into I think they call it a sally port. Anyway, you're in a box, and you can't get out either direction. Then finally a guard will push the button, and you get to go inside to the classroom. And you know, I just got to the point where I was comfortable in that environment. And there was no intimidation really possible from them to me. I met with the baddest of the bad. And they, for some reason, had asked to talk to me. And I was okay with that. I really remember this one young guy. He was what they call a prospect for the Hells Angels, which means he's an apprentice. He's on his way to try to get into the club. We're talking, and I'm witnessing to him, and he's got this swastika tattooed on him. And so I finally said to him, I couldn't help myself, actually. Do you know Jesus is a Jew? That was pretty much the end of the conversation. But you know what, folks? No matter what environment you're in, whether it's trauma or intimidation, as a chaplain pastor, I had to be faithful to the message. The message doesn't change. It doesn't matter if it's a drunk or if it's a criminal or if it's some sweet lady on Sunday morning. I always used to hear ladies say, and of course men say it too, but I'm just not that kind of person. Pastor Rob says, yes, you are. That's why you behave like that. And that's why you need a Savior. You need forgiveness. Well, let me tell you about the last phone call. This was kind of peculiar. So I get this phone call from an outfit called Recovery in Action. And they are a in-home rehabilitation for addicts place that was out in our community. And basically their approach was that they would use the Buddhist approach and teach peace and kindness and niceness and so on. And they were getting a little flack from some of their residents who had some Christian background. And so they said, would you come and give us a Christian perspective on recovery every Wednesday afternoon? Wednesday's our Spirit Day. Would you come and... Can you imagine getting that kind of invitation? Would you come and tell all these addicts and alcoholics about Jesus every week? I prayed about it for about 20 seconds. Said, Lord, yes, I'll take it. It's... I come from a background of alcoholism and addiction. My daddy told me, don't you ever smoke, drink, cuss. I don't want you fighting at school. And you know what? I obeyed. That's who I was. My siblings didn't obey. My mother was married 9 times. Simple terms, I come from a rugged background. And it was interesting as I sit and talk with these addicts and alcoholics every week. One time, this kind of a smart alecky kid was questioning what I knew about all this. And he said, well, did you ever smoke pot? Do you ever drink this? You ever done that? And I just said, wait, let me just stop you. I've never done any of what you're going to ask me. But you know what I know? I have a heart that cares for you. And I have a brokenness in my own soul. 1990, I didn't tell him this, but in 1993, I had an emotional breakdown. And basically, I've been in therapy ever since. Do I know what it is to be broken? I do. And so I felt like I had a heart for these addicts and alcoholics, and I could communicate with them. And did I believe Jesus could help them? Absolutely. So that was the last phone call that I have to talk about. But, it's, I guess what I'd say to you is God's in the whole thing. That's what I was. My goal in life, when I was a young man, was to be a coach. So, in order to be a coach, I had to become a teacher. Back in the 60s, that's how it was. But when I graduated from college, the teaching credential program turned me down. So what am I going to do now? Well, my wife was going to a Bible school in Sacramento. And I thought, well, I'll just go there with her. And that was in 1972. But it wasn't long after that, the first phone call came. Would you come and preach? It's, I went into the ministry totally dependent upon God. I'm not gifted with a cheery personality. I'm not even gifted with a particularly, like most people wonder why I don't like them. But and that's changed a little bit. And I had no gift of gab. My wife and I took this Taylor-Johnson temperament analysis test when we were just getting married or after we got married. One of the categories is expressiveness. And you could get from 1 to 100 and 1 to 99. She got a 98. She's a very friendly person. I got a 2. I'm primed to be a pastor. I tell you all that just to say, praise the Lord for all the blessings those 350 people that got baptized, praise the Lord. All that church growth, praise the Lord. It was about him. It's not about me. So, thank you. I will say one more thing as she comes to talk about announcements and birthdays. One of the simple things we always did at church was, when we were small, is sing happy birthday to people every Sunday. And then we would say, many happy returns on the day of thy birth. May sunshine and gladness be given. May God in his mercy prepare you on earth for a beautiful birthday in heaven.